Rick's younger brother, David Rezabek, is going to do an introduction for him. I believe this was something that he prepared for Rick's, I guess, name on the Air and Space Museum and the Smithsonian, and so he's going to do part of the stuff that he wrote for that. So without further ado, David Rezabek, Rick's brother.
Thank you, Dr. Rothmeyer. Good evening, faculty, students, and honored guests. As Dr. Rothmeyer said, my name is David Rezabek, and I am the youngest of 5 boys in our family. All of us certified airheads, a trait we inherited from our father. I'm honored to be here tonight to help introduce my brother Rick, as he is recognized as Iowa State's Aerospace Engineering Department's Distinguished Alumni of the Year. But first, a word about me. Unlike my brother Rick, I did not leave the cozy confines of Iowa State with an aerospace engineering degree in hand. No, instead, after my 2.5 years of studies, I was sent away with more of a consolatory note saying essentially, good job. Please reevaluate your commitment to academics before contacting us again. Thus, in addition to tonight's award, I can think of no better way to honor Rick's achievements than by awarding his baby brother an honorary degree in aerospace engineering. Details can be worked out over drinks later tonight. Hashtag I'm buying. Now on to my brother. With graduation drawing near in the spring of 1980, Rick set his sights on working for the famed Lockheed Skunk Works. Undaunted to hear that Lockheed was not coming to Iowa State to recruit, he convinced Lockheed to fly him to Burbank, California for an interview and subsequently award him a job as a coveted Skunk Works engineer. Rick's first years with Lockheed were shrouded in secrecy until the unveiling of the F-117 stealth fighter. Subsequent work on the F-117 and later the F-22 Raptor led to Rick being named chief engineer of Lockheed Martin's Joint Strike Fighter proposal, now named the X-35. The Joint Strike Fighter contract promised to be the largest award in the history of the United States Department of Defense. The new stealth fighter would replace aging designs for the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marines, and would serve some of our nation's closest allies. Rick's team developed 3 different X-35 variants, one including a revolutionary lift fan design to meet the requirements of performing short takeoffs and vertical landings. Once the Concorde demonstrator was completed, Rick received a further nod of approval by being named the X-35 project manager. Critics argued the X-35 aggressive innovations would be its undoing while competing against Boeing's much more conservative X-32 demonstrator. But while the X-32 struggled in flight tests, the X-35 flourished. In the end, it would be Lockheed Martin's X-35. Lockheed Martin's X-35 that would triumph. The newly designated F-35 Lightning II would ensure the company's place atop the aerospace community at the dawn of the 21st century. Unable to top his crowning achievements at Lockheed Martin, Rick joined Black Ram Engineering as a partner shortly after joining the Joint Strike Fighter contract was awarded. He retired at the relatively young age of 54. Today, Rick serves on the Iowa State Aerospace Engineering Industrial Advisory Council. My family and I have benefited greatly from Rick's generosity over the years, and we are thrilled to see his accomplishments recognized by his alma mater. In closing, while one can never diminish the merits of advanced degrees, it may be of interest to this audience in particular to know that all of Rick's achievements were accomplished armed only with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering from Iowa State University.
With that, I'd like to introduce Rick Rezabek, for those who don't know him yet. I also want to say, just personally, I really appreciate how much Rick has given back to the department over the years. He's always been here for the department, and he's always worked with students and done really, really fantastic things for the department over the years. So I very, very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
We gave them their choice of what picture to put on.
So this is a reproduction of the plaque that will be hung on the department wall of fame outside of our main office. So with that, again, I'd like to thank Rick for all of his service to the country and to the profession and to the department, and he's going to give us an overview of that now.
Yep.
I'm gonna steal this, because I'm sure you did.
I think David advanced your slide for you.
Yeah, you
I did.
That's fine.
Stole your thunder.
This chart is just an excuse to show my Stinson client. And if I had to have a one page, you know, of my career, that would be it. So we'll get into the meat. I'm gonna run through some of the projects that we worked on during my career. 1980, David mentioned, I didn't know anybody at Lockheed. They weren't interviewing at Iowa State. I did a cover letter and a resume and sent it to HR. And I had somebody there actually answer it and come solicit me to come out for an interview. And I told them that I thought they built the most fascinating high performance airplanes in the world. They were impressed that a college kid knew what an SR-71 and a U-2 was. And I said, I think I can help. I still have a draft of that letter I found in some of my stuff recently. So they flew me out when I was still in the last year, senior year of our work. And I got an offer, you know, back here in Ames with the job description of I would be a designer of air conditioning ducts. And it's like, you gotta be kidding. I called them up, I said, I really want to work for you guys, and you couldn't make that offer sound less appealing if you tried. But I'm gonna bet on the come that something good will come out of this, and I'll accept the job. And as part of that interview, I ended up going into Burbank, and they take you into the building, and you get in a little conference room, and all the work there was classified at the time. The F-117 was still a black project. Nobody had acknowledged it even existed. And I'm sitting in a room with about 8 different department managers, because as a senior aerospace student, and they go, what do you specialize in? And you go, well, I'm kind of good in aerodynamics and propulsion, and I like my flight control classes, and structures was pretty good, you know, and performance, and I could do all. So you end up talking to all these different department managers, and somebody asked me, they said, do you think you could design a pitot probe? And I'm like, yeah, that seems like the right level of technology for a fresh out of school, you know, young engineer, and the risk and everything and the maturity of the technology of pitot probe is well understood. And I said, I think that'd be a very appropriate job. They all busted out laughing and started kicking one of the guys and ribbing him in the ribs, because the pitot probes on the front of the F-117, which had to be stealthy, and they had to be de-iced, and they were composites with copper tips, with copper lines, and every time they would heat them up, the tips would pop off, and they were at risk of being the technology driver in the first flight of the airplane. So we'll talk more about those in a minute. And the front end of those pitot probes were faceted and chamfered and so oddball from what the science of pitot probes were that they thought that was just hilarious. So I ended up getting hired in. I ended up being one of 15 people in the aerodynamics department. We had 3 projects going on, the F-117, a bomber, and a cruise missile project that went nowhere. And about a month after getting hired, my security clearance comes through, and our boss, Dick Cantrell, was a very cool manager, grew up in Arkansas, I think, and he's showing me the side view of the F-117. And that picture up at the top left is the only one I could find in the internet that showed the vertical tails on the original Ship 1 780 airplane. And he's showing me a side view of the airplane. I'm going, those tails look too small. And here's my boss, and he's going, no, they're just big enough. It's like, yeah, but look at that cockpit, sail area up front, and so forward to the CG and that cockpit area, and the tails are really dihedraled and they're swept like mad. It's like, oh, look too small. Fine, okay, I shut up. Nope, they're big enough. We've done all our wind tunnel work. First flight of the airplane, the Hal Farley, the pitot probes had angle of attack and side slip feedback, but because of the faceted chamfered and everything, they were nervous about them. So they had switches in the cockpit that had the feedback loops of alpha and beta turned off. For first flight, the airplane got airborne, geared up, and started to oscillate about plus or minus 10 degrees of beta within about 30 seconds of first flight. And Bob Lotchke, which was Lockheed Skunk Works flight control guru, told Farley, it's like, turn the probes on. And he did, hit the switches in the cockpit and saved the airplane. But come down on the first flight, the tails were 50% too small. We ended up in a panic exercise in that first month of flight in the airplane to redesign the tails about 50% bigger. So you can see in that next photo down there, the redesigned tails. And I did not remind my aerodynamics boss after that of what I told him on my first day on the job, because I wanted to keep my job. And the pressure on him was pretty good to get that fixed. And his excuse was, well, it helped make the signature of the airplane better by having them smaller. And the signature guy goes, actually the signature would probably be better with them big. So the chief engineer went, you aero guys, just pay attention to your own stuff, will you? So lesson learned to there. So that's my comment of rule number 1, show up, be there, be present, be willing to talk. I quickly got assigned to be the junior engineer to Ray Little, a retired Rockwell guy who had worked the B-1 bomber and been a Rockwell engineer his whole career. And we were doing the weapon separation work. So we would do the wind tunnel testing of the small, 10 scale weapons and the analysis of them. We do the simulation work, the 6 degree of freedom simulation work. I worked up a graphics program to show it in 3 dimensions, X, Y, Z, front view, side view, top view stuff. The pilots loved it. They'd never seen a graphic representation of a trajectory before. And quickly, as we started doing it, the primary weapons on the 117 are those laser guided bombs. And those laser guided bombs have tail fins that are cable actuated. As the bomb comes out of the airplane, the cable pulls a lever and the tails pop out. Well, until the tails pop out, that bomb is unstable in pitch and yaw, very unstable. So we were going to, the deployment scheme on the F-117 as designed has a weapons loading trapeze that would come out below the bottom view of the airplane. And that was for 2 reasons, to load the weapons, but also 2 of the requirements on it was Maverick missiles and sidewinders. They wanted to be able to shoot down a Russian AWACS airplane with a Sidewinder with these, if need be. So we started doing the analysis of it, and I looked at some of our different testing analysis. I said, hey, I think we can drop these unstable laser-guided bombs with the trapeze up. And my old mentor says, well, that wouldn't be safe. I'm going, what do you mean it wouldn't be safe? We wouldn't have to use that hideous hydraulic trapeze thing in flight. And the amount of time that the door is open goes from 13 seconds with the trap down to 3. Open, drop, shut. And we had had enough hydraulic problems. It's like, if that trapeze ever got stuck down in the middle of the mission, you're flying home with your bomb bay door open and this trapeze locked down. It's like, doesn't sound safe to me. So I won the argument quick, little system engineering thing in my early career. And we went out to the flight test facility out in the desert. We were flight testing it. And we asked the colonel, who was going to be the operations commander of the first squadron of operational F-117s, you know, whether he wanted to try flight testing it with the trapeze up for dropping these laser-guided bombs. You know, oh hell yeah, that's all it took. And the whole airplane had been deployed that way through its whole life. So that gave a big improvement to the safety of the observable side of those things doing a military mission. And after about 2.5 years of doing that, I go, if I do this weapon separation stuff for too much longer, I'm always gonna be the weapon separation guy at Lockheed. They'll never let me do anything else. And so I left that group. And I said, I wanna go work some of the new designs and new concepts and things like that. And at that time, the ATF competition was just getting started. And we had been flying the F-117 for maybe a year, year and a half. And the Air Force comes out with its requirements for the ATF. And they go, okay, the Advanced Tactical Fighter is a twin engine, single seat, yay Air Force, you know, so much for those trade studies, they're done. You know, twin engine, single seat, super cruise, air superiority fighter that can, you know, have radars that can detect airplanes out to miles, you know, that the Russians and Chinese and anybody will never be able to do. And it can super cruise, and it can do high agility, high angle of attack with reckless abandon. And we, holy crap, we don't know how to do any of that. We didn't have radars in the F-117. We had an angle of attack limiter of what, 14 degrees, something like that. You know, we couldn't maneuver high angle of attack and all the above. So the amount of new invention work that went into ATF and the early concepts was really pretty dynamic and fast-paced and very rapid. And later, you know, when the YF-22 came out and got the first public showing, they kept the designs, the Northrop design, and then the Lockheed team, the Lockheed General Dynamics Boeing team's designs. They kept them very quiet and didn't show anything until the actual rollouts. And we all commented that, well, Dick Cantrell wasn't going to have tails too small this time. We called the prototype airplane, we all nicknamed it Dumbo. You know, those vertical tails were so damn big. It's like, yeah, I think he overdid it a little bit. But one of the other early things in my career, the program manager at that time was Bruce Wright. And Bruce had come from the commercial side of Lockheed. He had worked a lot of his career on the L-1011. And I showed up on that project team as one of the Skunk Works kids, and a lot of the project people hadn't worked in the Skunk Works before. They brought in a bunch of people from the commercial side of the company to help get this project stood up. And I noticed there was one of our aerodynamics girl, Janet Ross, was doing wave drag analysis of various designs from the designers, and she didn't have a clue what one point design drawings she was working from another. It's like, Janet, you need to keep that stuff organized and tell, you know, the groups of what your results are to show drag. So I helped get a little bit of that analysis team going. We did some early trades that showed the radar guys and the avionics guys that the size of their radar dish is really important when you're designing and sizing a fighter class airplane. And that alone could, you know, drive the gross weight up over 100,000 pounds. And they were shocked that that would be the end result of it. And the program manager, Bruce Wright's going, more of that, do more of that. Those are good studies. So we helped do a bunch of that. We had early, Bruce had gone back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base when the competition was still wide open. There hadn't been any teaming yet, and there was 8 or 9 companies, you know, all vying for this advanced tactical fighter. And Bruce came back from his latest briefing. He said, the Air Force told us we were 12th out of 8. And he said, they said, if we don't show up the next time with a real fighter design, we're done. And at the time, we had a radar concept. We had been working on flat panel radar antennas for the F-117 that'd be on kind of that four-body front nose section that would be weather detecting radars and things. And the avionics group had been working on antenna designs that would allow a radar wave to propagate out at the frequencies that the enemy is trying to detect you at, and get that reflected radar wave back through, and yet not let the enemy radar antenna see through the antenna also. So they called it an evanescent radar. And our concept for the advanced tactical fighter, we called it a PT boat nose, because it was going to have 3 of them. It was going to have one on the front and 2 great big ones on the side with a big pointy nose with flat panel array antennas that would have been hideous. And I ended up going with Gary Irvin, who was later the president of Northrop's aviation biz, and he had been one of our lead low observable engineers, and Bill Rickman, our head of avionics for the radar trades. And I was a little aero guy who was just worried that, and I wanted to make sure we had a good high angle of attack nose shape on the ATF. And we went over to one of the research lab buildings where Dave Young was working on these radar antennas, flat panel arrays, and we went, and as you guys all know, I talk a lot. I have a big mouth, public speaker type. So I'd go, Dave, if we gave you a lot of time and a lot of budget, and you basically lay out the schedule and how much stuff you want to research, and we'll fund it all, and open book, could you work this stuff in 3 dimensions instead of just 2D? Could we work it 3D with curves instead of flat panels? And he went, well, I guess we could work on that. And it's like, okay, so we're gonna lay out this, risk thing with as many tests and experiments and stuff as you want to do, and you tell us how much it's going to cost, and we'll put in the proposal. And yeah, I guess we could do that. So we went back to the design team, and within about 5 minutes, we came up with that nose shape that you see on all these 5th generation fighters, with the little chamfered edges, and that'll give a place where the LO guys can do their magic, and it'll have, not very sharp slopes, so the radar antenna propagation will work and everything. And it'll give me a nice, good, sharp, clean shine for my high angle of attack stuff. Because Andy Skow's Northrop studies on F-20, taught us all that's where high angle of attack characteristics come from, is the nose of the airplane. The tails are just along for the ride. And we did in about 5 minutes, that deal handshake between the 3 of us, and that nose shape's been on those airplanes ever since. So that was probably 6 months of work. And as the prototype award for ATF got awarded, And suddenly it's this big industry teaming thing where Lockheed won one of the proposals for the prototype airplane, and there was the first time of the big industrial teaming of different contractor teams together. So Boeing and General Dynamics and Lockheed were all on the same team with the Advanced Tactical Fighter, later became the F-22. They're still on the team together on F-22, although Lockheed ended up buying General Dynamics later, out of it. And a lot of us wanted to work on other projects and not get sucked into that big multi-company furball thing. And I got dragged off into this other black hole that turned into Dark Star. And the one in the top left is the original Dark Star, not the Tom Cruise Maverick Dark Star, but that was the original thing called Dark Star. And the idea back then was, this was the time when the SR-71 was getting retired. And the government says, we don't know what to do next. They basically said, give us studies, look at everything. We don't know if it's hypersonic cruise things. We don't know if it's blimps. We don't know if we should launch stuff out of submarines. We don't know if we should launch things off of aircraft carriers. Study it all. Give us trades. Tell us how much it costs. Tell us what the performance would be, what kind of size constraints you have. And oh, by the way, your security sucks. You're gonna do it all by hand. We don't trust any of your computers. And we'll let you use an HP 41 hand calculator, and that's it. So we did about 1.5 years of hand calculated drag buildups and performance, and you would turn around an airplane, the designers would be doing a concept design of something, and you'd be out there with little rulers and guessing wetted areas and all the above, and doing drag buildups and doing performance, little time increments by hand. The weight at the initial phase is this, the weight at the final stage of cruise is that, and doing the iterations on that all by hand. And during that project, I basically said, hey, I'll do what job nobody wants. All the aero guys wanted to be stability and control engineers. It's like, fine, okay, everybody wants to do S&C, we get it. I'll do the performance stuff, I'll do the sizing stuff, nobody else wants to do it, that's fine. And we had 8 years of the Air Force fighting, pick a favorite 3-letter acronym, fighting the satellite bunch, fighting DC budget wars, and oh my God, the idea that there would be something out there that would get and gather low observable, unobserved intelligence, and then what group of people in Washington, DC would own that intelligence and go around and get power from that intelligence. It's a very interesting Washington, DC food fight, and it's endless. And towards the end of that, the government project manager of this project says, hey, we got a problem in the government. We cannot agree on what the government specification for this thing should be. Because every time we have a DC meeting, somebody's axe gets gored and somebody's payload requirement doesn't get met, and they get mad and they jump away from the table and they say, I'm taking my $500 million or $1 billion worth of funding and I'm out of here. And he said, we cannot get closure on all those specs. And until we get a specification agreed out of the government, we can't do a finish competition between you guys at Lockheed and the other team up at Boeing on who wins this thing. He says, however, if you two industrial companies decided on your own that you were going to team on this project, we don't have to produce a specification. It's like, okay, see ya. Next day, we're teamed with Boeing. And at the end of the day, this ended up being funded as a DARPA project because, as you can imagine, there was a lot of question in the technology world of, would that fly? it doesn't look very balanced. Where's the tail? All the above. And that design was to meet very specific rules of the world of low observables and what kind of criteria means you were detected or not. And there was lots of theoretical analysis against threat fields and things like that, and that was one of the answers, and it would work really good. We had versions of Dark Star that would be up to 72 hours endurance. And of course, they wanted to fly as high as we possibly could. So these were, 60,000 feet plus airplanes, subsonic, up to 3 days endurance, and of course, great big huge wingspans. Well, the final end of where the money came from, it came out of DARPA, and we had to build a little mini version of it, which was about 1/3 scale, and with smaller engines, Williams engines and what have you, and that's finally what flew. And about that time, part of those food fights in DC, the Air Force came out with a non-stealthy tier, what do they call it? Tier 2+ airplane, which ended up being Global Hawk. So there ended up being a paper proposal fly-off between our little mini DARPA Dark Star. It's like, well, that wasn't the real size of it. It was supposed to be much bigger. And Global Hawk. And lo and behold, Global Hawk had longer range and bigger payloads because, it was a clean sheet of paper airplane and it won. So the Dark Star airplane project died and went away. However, the two airplanes at the bottom, the one on the right is called the RQ-180, and that's open. You can Google it and find it. I pulled those off the internet. And that photo at the left is one flying that somebody snapped around the world of Edwards overhead. And those are out there in the world today, and it's a follow-on from that whole, we're not sure what to do, but we think something along these lines would be really useful out there in the world, and that continues today. And I had design teams and project teams helping do the RQ-180, which ended up being a Northrop project. So I had been working on that project about 8 years in all those food fights and doing various overnight. Some of the work drills were 24 hours a day. We had to turn around a new design concept and price it out and give a brief to the government because of a meeting they had. Somebody got pissed off and they took $500 million off the table. Unless you guys can tell us we can do a project for that much less, we're shutting down the doors tomorrow. So we did that turnaround cycle many times in that. And my old boss, Mike Evans, who had started off as the head of aerodynamics when I first hired him, and he had later become the head of advanced design. And he calls me up one day and he says, hey, we have this project called ASTOBL. That was about 1993 by that time. And he said, we got a proposal coming up, and I want you to come join that project team and you do all the technical planning of that project. And if we win, you'll be the chief engineer on that study. It was a DARPA contract, $40 million, 3 years. About that same time, Lockheed ends up buying General Dynamics Fort Worth to get the F-16 business. And the GD Fort Worth guys had been working on the same proposal, this ASTOBL contract. As it turns out, Lockheed won one of the contracts. One of our propulsion engineers, actually two of our propulsion engineers, Paul Schumpert and Paul Bevilacqua, and of course Bevilacqua's gotten all the PR and press since then, did the design trades for this short takeoff vertical landing propulsion system called the shaft driven lift fan, and they had applied for a patent for it, and Lockheed got a patent for it. And out of this DARPA contract, the two winners of the contract were, Lockheed got one of the contracts to do a shaft driven lift fan, and McDonnell Douglas down in St. Louis won the other contract to do a gas driven lift fan. And Mac Air in St. Louis tried to get both of them by offering a cheaper deal, you know, 2 for the price of 1 kind of thing, we'll do both. And of course, we have the patent for it, so they couldn't. And at one point, the Air Force, General Molnar, tried to get Lockheed to give up their patent rights on it. It's like, we don't think so. No. Well, I'll cancel the whole thing. Go right ahead. We'll keep building the F-16s. You know, we called his bluff, and the bluff went away. But A. Stovall was, in the $40 million, we were gonna do a bunch of design studies and some simulation work, some flight controls work, and build that large-scale powered model that you see at the lower right, which was about 80% size airframe, actually powered by a Pratt & Whitney F100 engine. We did a kind of boilerplate drive shaft off of it, and Pratt & Whitney donated a single-stage fan from the F-119, sent it to Allison in Indianapolis, and Allison worked up a pseudo lift fan from that aero fan stage on the cheap, and we were able to do wind tunnel testing of the shaft-driven lift fan concept at the 80 by 120 wind tunnel in NASA Ames and on an outdoor rig to get all the hover type of flow field effects and things like that. Those tests went good. We had about maybe 3 or 4 design engineers designing the airframe. Some of them were young guys in the beginning of their career. And I went, if you're not having fun doing what you're doing right now, get out of the industry, because it doesn't get any better than this, guys. You have the most fun. You're building a real frickin' airplane. It's, 30 feet out the door out in the shop. It's basically all welded up steel, and a little bit of fiberglass, low temperature cure forebodies and things like that, and for building something to be in that very valuable NASA Ames wind tunnel, it needed to be a factor of safety of about 5, unless it was a flight certified piece of hardware. So big factors of safety, a lot of steel in it. Those tests went very well, and they were part of us winning then the competition, where we ended up winning the down select to do the demonstrator airplanes. And I mentioned that the other winner of that A. Stovall contract was McDonnell Douglas. Well, the McDonnell Douglas team built up a similar wind tunnel model on this gas-driven lift fan concept. And as Vera could probably tell you, gas-driven fans coming from the back part of the airplane have a control lag of about how much? A lot. And they had been teamed with GE doing those early studies at Peebles, and they basically went, we're done. This ain't gonna work. We're not gonna do that concept. And as a result of that, Boeing had been paying for their own design analysis and a wind tunnel project model that's the same hover type model. And the Boeing concept, they were doing on their own nickel. They had, I think, $1 of DARPA contract money so that the government said they would go show up and they would go evaluate their work. Boeing ends up winning one of the 2 demonstrator awards out of JAST from that effort. McDonnell Douglas didn't win anything. They had been teamed with Northrop and British Aerospace. So those big 3 heavyweights of the fighter business all of a sudden are out of business. And within probably 3 months after that, Boeing buys McDonnell Douglas. Boom. You have nothing left. We have a project, scope that can come to fruition if we win, and they get the McDonnell Douglas part of their portfolio going. So the rest of these charts on X35, I'm going to go through pretty quick. These are part of a briefing I was asked to put together. One of my employees who had worked for me when I was in this Black Ram engineering consulting side of my career He went to work for Princeton University at their plasma physics lab, and he's helping design fusion reactor test hardware out there at Princeton. And his boss happened to be a Skunkworks fan, so Doug Bishop's telling him about me and the Skunkworks, and he wants to bring me out and give a briefing if I could. So I put together this brief of how we did X35, kind of the Skunkworks way, modern time from my project team. And I got lucky to go approve it, and the Skunkworks guy said, yeah, you can go brief him on it. So I built these charts on kind of the tactics we used during the project to execute the project, to help educate, you know, another small engineering team doing some high research work. So I won't go through all these little notes, but we really cut down the people size. You know, project teams start with two engineers. They can argue with each other, and halfway through the project they'll be dying because they don't have enough people, and you give them one more and they're saved. They've just had a 50% increase in manpower with one new engineer showing up, and by the time they're done, the senior guy or lady will be experienced enough that they can go off and do other things and get promoted into other fun stuff, and you'll still have 2 people left to finish the job. So teams of 2, great way to start. With our avionics head, I said, hey, most of the complexity of this airplane is going to be the flight control software and their fight with Pratt & Whitney to make this integrated Stovall propulsion system work. And the avionics people always run software, and they want to be the kings of software, and they drive flight controls groups nuts over the arguments over software. So most of the cockpit displays in this are going to be, you know, off-the-shelf panels and glass panels that we'll get from other vendors. I said, I think we can do the avionics with no software people. And if there's software that comes up that'd be in your boat, we'll just hand it to Jane Gardner, who's the flight control software lead. And he went, I like that idea. I don't have to have an avionics software group. We did it. We did it with 0 avionics software engineers and gave it all to the flight controls people, and managed to pull it off. So planning all that and the head counts and the money and procurements and what are you gonna buy and all the above, we had to pretty much plan from scratch. We probably spent about a year and a half planning the scope of this project from the beginning. Specs, I insisted that every engineering group would sign every one of the specs. Some of the companies, our Fort Worth company, didn't do it that way. They used to put out a propulsion spec on the F-16. No other group other than propulsion would ever read it or sign it, and then go to the engine companies as gospel and going, how could you do business like that? We were so big they had to bend over backwards and meet our every whim. It's like, oh, I don't like that at all. We're gonna read every one. I read every one. My deputy, George Law, we read every one of those specs, front to cover. I would give people crap. Why am I finding this? You should have found this. I'm 10 signatures into this thing, it's the last signature, and I'm finding stuff that you guys should have found. One of my mentors back there, Garfield Thomas, he had been the head of avionics on F-117. He told me once, he says, don't worry how big a document gets. Whoever's responsible for that document, they'll make sure all the stuff within it is good. He's like, the problems come when it's this document saying something and one over here that says something related and they don't match. He says the problem's in the interfaces. So work the interfaces. Minimize how many you build, make them as big as they gotta be, but make sure you do good interface control on every one of them. And one of my mandates was always, PowerPoint is not an engineering document. I'm sorry. And one of the things, I think it's on a later slide, but one of the classic things out of these projects typically, I'm sure we've all lived through it, is either the monthly program review or something like that, you know, or it's a program management and everybody builds endless PowerPoint briefs and they're out of date by the time you even end up presenting them. We didn't do any of them. We did a weekly status. It said, the weekly status, show us your schedule, where you're at on it, tell us what you did last week, tell us what you're gonna do next week, and let us know what issues you got. Get off the stage. We did that once a week with every one of the IPTs. We did no weekly program reviews. Engineers did not spend their time building PowerPoint briefs. We did the technical reviews with the formal government review. We had one that was an initial design review and a final design review, and then flight readiness review, and that was it. So we wanted very much to be that the people could set their tempo in a regular week to actually get some work done. There was one other thing I did as chief engineer, and I'm responsible for all the engineering sign-offs and everything. And I learned the tricks that some engineering groups have done in production projects and other projects. They would release a drawing. This is a classic engineering tactic. They would release a drawing sometimes with nothing but the title block filled in. No change drawing gets released, nothing on it. And we'll catch it all in the Rev A and the revision and what have you. You've seen it, right? I said, we're not doing that. We don't have time to do that. Manufacturing is gonna sign our drawings. A drawing doesn't get released until manufacturing says there's enough information on there to build every part. And out of that, we ended up, I think there were 3,700 drawings on the airplane to get the airplane, the 2 airplanes and 3 different versions built. As an example, the A-10, we did a bid in my later career for doing a re-wing on the A-10. The A-10 had 30,000 drawings for the wing, period. Just wing and pylons. So the technology level with the 5-axis machining and CATIA and 3D design has cut that down so much. But by having the manufacturing sign-offs, we had a total out of those 3,700 drawings, only 1,500 changes in total on the whole project. So that means half of the drawings got no changes ever, and the other half had 1 change, Rev A, period. It helped the production flow, and of course you're building prototypes, you know, so you got no backlog, so everything's a nightmare trying to get it all fabricated. I've talked about some of this. We didn't do any mandated chief engineer reviews. Who's going where, who's coming in. We laid out a typical calendar month and tried very much to schedule this stuff so there was actually days of the week where engineers and people could get real work done and they wouldn't be dragged into some management thing. System engineering, we had an integration lead. They tracked all the specs. This was about 6 people total. Tracked all the specs, gave us a status, who has it, where does it need to be next, who's sitting on it. One of my engineers ran our configuration control boards. That was John Baker. He had been a Air Force F-4 Wild Weasel pilot, and he had been a Marine F-4 pilot out of Vietnam. Nobody ever turned John Baker down. He was this big too, big guy, but very polite and kind. And he would run our configuration control boards. And I would have to do nothing more than saying, hey John, I think we're gonna need a configuration control board, CCB meeting on this topic. Get everybody together, get it organized, let me know when you're ready for the meeting. One of the things we did very well on that project is we would hold one decision meeting at that level, chief engineer level. If I needed my program manager there because the budget impact was gonna be too much, he was there. One meeting, one decision, done, no further management change or anybody else. It works so much better. The team morale stays up because they know a decision's been made and everybody can carry forward from it and press on from that without the typical do loops on big projects where it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. We did risk management and all that regular waterfall charts and things like that. I stole a tactic from Sherman Mullen, the top 10. He had every engineering group, and this came from ATF and the YF-22. Every engineering group list down your top 10 problems, things you can't solve yourself. And we just would have them once a week, and we'd go through about 3 of them, and would have a nice problem solving session, and nobody got yelled at for bringing problems forward. It got to the point where the engineers would come and say, hey, I need a top 10 meeting on this. And as a problem solving thing, they work great. They're informal. The customer was always invited to every one of them. And by the time you get it up to a big design review or something, you know, and risk profiles, you'd already have a tactic and a plan worked out of how you're gonna fix it. So that worked great. Software. I only gave one question to Jane Gardner, my lead flight control software engineer on the project. When can I do an engine run? It's like, I know all the funny things you guys do and play around with version 4 and version 4.1 and version 4.1.1.1.1, you know, as the software goes through the resolution of problems and stuff, and chart problem reports and stuff. We designated one of my system engineers, Marcia Law. She owned the software release. She would write a letter that says this software has been tested against this hardware in the lab, these specific items, that specific software configuration of the items in the lab. It is good for the following functionality. And she was an independent check on how the software release went. And that worked very good. We ended up having 0 software updates during the course of the flight test program. 3 versions of the airplane, no flight critical software updates at all. If we had, they would have been a nightmare because the software recursion loop is always too darn long. I've had people ask me about the color scheme on the airplane and tails. The top left airplane is the Air Force X-35A. That was the first one to fly, Air Force version. I had given Kevin Walsh, one of our design leads, the assignment to give me a paint scheme that looks like an F-16 tactical paint scheme. I'm gonna take that drawing and get it down to Fort Worth and Dane Hancock and the president of the company and make sure they're all okay with it before we go painting the airplane. And they did, and they approved it, and they were happy. And it looked tactical and important. The second airplane to fly, which is the one in the middle, was the Navy jet. And Glenn Harbison and Andrew Mock was our local rep from Pax River. They come in at my office one day and they went, we want to paint the Navy airplane different. Okay, what do you want to do? We want to paint it all black with a white stripe down the middle like a skunk. No. It's like, I'll choose my battles, thank you very much. We're not going to be doing that. I said, tell you what though, if you can come up with something that the Navy thinks looks really good and Navy-ish, I'll let you do the vertical tail, however you want. Oh, okay. So I went off and they came up with that cool thing on the vertical tail. F-35 Charlie, you know, in the later F-35 program did something similar and it came out looking pretty cool. So the first airplane comes back and gets converted to the Stovall airplane where the lift fan goes in and all the Stovall stuff goes in and what have you. And by the time flight test shows up, they decided they didn't like the clean vanilla tactical paint scheme and they came up with this Stovall hat trick thing for the tails on our X-35B. And one of our Navy customers looked at that and went, you guys have no shame. It's like, yeah, you're right. By now, we didn't. Flight test. The skunk works, I think most of the companies do this, but by the time the airplane comes power on, you know, manufacturing hands it off to flight test. We always have a flight test engineer that basically owns the airplane at that point. And all the last manufacturing work that needs to be done and all the testing that needs to be done, they sequence that, they own it. would do a daily slap board of what's ready and what's not, and what parts are we held for, and would do that first thing in the morning, get the work organized for the day or for the week, would plan it out many times a day. We flew those X-35 airplanes 6 times in one day, both versions, the Air Force version and the Navy version. So we win the contract. F-35, you know, is now the award. It's going to be down in Fort Worth. At that point, I told the vice presidents, my next job at Lockheed, I would have been a vice president of something. And I said, I've seen your jobs suck. I said, they're all political, they're all financial targets coming from corporate. Heaven help you if you actually take the projects that are under your portfolio and start mucking around with them, because you'll screw them all up, and all the people underneath you will get disenchanted and demoralized, and they'll say, fine, you do it all. So I had made a deal with one of our consultants, Russ Stromberg. He had a small analysis group. He had been a Marine Harrier test pilot through the AV-8A and the AV-8B program for most of his career. He'd done a lot of operational testing on night attack, AV-8B, and things like that. And he was our flight controls guru early on to teach about STOL stuff. So I made a deal that I was going to join him, would form a new version of Black Ram Engineering in a partnership, and would go have fun. So I did that. Our project manager down at Fort Worth, Tom Burbidge, took over the program after Frank Capuccio won it. And Tom said, I need you guys down here helping get F-35 going. I'm gonna basically have a staffing requirement that says, can you fog the smear? You're hired to get the manpower stood up. So in the early stages of F-35, I did a bunch of stuff. Tiger Team, they made me in charge of the thermal management Tiger Team. The airplane requirement had a problem that they basically gave a mission profile thermal requirement that says it's a 120-degree day, the airplane has been out on the ramp, it is heat soaked. The fuel's at 120-degree days. Start the engine, pre-flight for an hour with the engine running, go fly any mission it can fly, come back at the end of that, no refueling, land, post-flight for 30 minutes, it's still 120 degrees days, and nothing overheats. And we went, holy crap, nothing can do that. And we went, yeah, we know, it's a real problem. We go out to the desert in Saudi Arabia and this and that, and you know, everything overheats before we can even take off. It's like, you guys fix that. So we ran a Tiger Team, added a heat exchanger that's on the upper right side of the inlet. That air heat exchanger, Dane Hancock, the president of the company, told me, get that off my airplane. I went, make that requirement go away, and it's gone tomorrow. The requirement's still there? That's on your jet, Dane, sorry. So I could get away with that stuff at that point. So we did F-35 for a few years, about 3 or 4. The procurement people hated contractors and hated, you know, consultants, and they did everything possible to get us thrown out the door as they got staffed up. Became big food fights. Went down to Northrop. One of my X-35 leads, Scott Winship, who was the guy tagged with all the Stovall X-35 airplane, get that going, became a project manager of this JUCAS project. This X-47 that Northrop built and flew was the world's first unmanned airplane to do catapult launches off of an aircraft carrier, arrested landings on an aircraft carrier unmanned. Later, in another phase, they did an unmanned airplane aerial refueling, attaching to and targeting and capturing the Navy basket probe, and did actual refuelings. And Boeing now says their MQ-25 is the first doing refuel. Well, that's doing the easy part at the front end. This was the hard part, being the receiver at the back end. I had done, as part of the assessment of that project is Northrop tried to win the final competition. It ended up being a refueling tanker for the Navy. I told them, I'm Boeing, I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna beat you. You know, your tailless airplane and your delta wing are too short, and there's no place for radars and sensors and antennas and all the above. And I'm gonna do a big long fuselage thing if I'm Boeing with big long wings with high L over D. I didn't know anything about what Boeing was doing. I nailed it. They didn't want to change. They couldn't change. They were too late in the work to change. And Northrop lost. You know, they lose the whole final mission after doing all that technology development work, and now they're done. So we ended up getting called up to In Situ. In Situ was in Hood River, Oregon. They had just won an Iraq war support contract from the Marines to provide small reconnaissance support early in the different Gulf wars. They did it both Marines at Iraq and Afghanistan. And this small group that started up in Hood River had Scan Eagle, and they said they wanted to be the Dell computers of UAVs. And they went, we don't know what we've built. And the call for help came from the logistics guys out in the field trying to fix them all. And they went, we have no traceability on what the hell everything is. So we did a quick study. They had built 200 airplanes. Out of those 247 different configurations out of the 200 airplanes. Most of them, they did about 2 of each. And the vast majority, they did in about 4 different versions. We went, you don't need to be the Dell of UAV. You need to be Ford. You know, come out with the annual version and maybe a mid-year 6-month update, but your logistics tail is getting killed. They had no drawing numbers. They had no drawing configuration control. We had to teach them how to play like big airplane design people. And as a result of chasing this contract, because the Navy had a program of record, which is funding that goes on forever, those are big important things to win. Boeing ends up buying the company before even that contractor was awarded, and they bought it for $400 million. Lockheed paid $700 million to buy the F-16 business. We were going, holy crap. There was a huge competition to buy and win that UAV business. And we're still supporting our Black Ram follow-on company, Corsair Engineering, is still supporting that today. One of the things that happened as a part of winning that business, one of the engineers that we had hired in Black Ram, Bill Clark, In Situ said, can we hire him from you? We need somebody with good program background that the customer knows, that has good development experience. When if it's the right thing for him, it's the right thing for us, you bet. He retired as the vice president of operations of the company, you know, under Boeing's leadership. So that's most of the big aerospace stuff I've been doing. A couple charts to finish. General aviation's been in the family. Our dad, talk about timing. In 1980, I get hired by Lockheed, I leave Iowa, and I moved to California, and the next month, Dad buys an airplane project at home. It's like, what? So he started that Skybolt, Steve Skybolt, 1980, he and a buddy, and Steve spent 15 years getting it built and flying. So the general aviation side of my life has been a joy and a challenge. It's a different challenge than the design and analysis and hard engineering stuff, but it's constant work to keep these older airplanes, to keep any airplane, you know, maintained and flyable and airworthy. And it's a real multitasking part of your life to, you know, aviate well and safely and to do it right. Vera can verify that, Joe, Steve. My airplane in the top right is a 1937 Stinson Reliant. My brother Mike out in California has a 1942 Taylor Craft L2, and Steve here tonight has a 1947 Stinson Voyager. Stinson made really good airplanes. They're a great company. We have a lot of fun with this. We've been to Oshkosh several times, Reno air races, won trophies, got more trophies than we need. And that's the last slide. And that's my dad, Jack. We had a trip where we stopped in at the Columbia, California airstrip. He couldn't be here with us tonight, but we wanted to give you all a big thumbs up. It's been a great time, career. It's probably not over, but as hard as tonight is, it's over. Thanks.